An ocean of dissonant voices filled the throne room. They began in the ceremony room's familiar hum, but new layers joined it. A deep bass, arias that climbed and fell like waves, a bright crescendo that brought all voices into momentary harmony. The notes took on the Grey Maiden's talons and punctured Monique's skin. She covered her ears, but her skull pounded a rhythm of its own. A melodic bridge beckoned her to cross. Her head lolled onto the soft thatched back of the bridal chair. In her upside down gaze, shadows crawled across the wall of stars, its surface a starlit puddle that now trembled with the waves of sound. She thought of Phoebe, who died to a lesser choral cry. Hers would be a gentle whisper to Monique's death, a triumphant anthem of celestial chaos, the worm's song beautiful and complete. This wasn't the first time she'd been put in the wrong position and handed the wrong expectations. Her parents used to tell her she would become a man someday, a meaningless word to a child. She'd been ambivalent until she learned that it meant becoming her father or something like him. And then came horror and emptiness. She once fantasized tragic deaths. Only later did she dare fantasize tragic lives. If she'd known more, she could have found help. Better places, better people to hand her heart than Donna. Other women had stability and support, but Monique never knew how they managed it. There was a lot she didn't know, and now she wouldn't even learn how it felt to grow old. The choir was going to kill her. Was their song a frequency that bent dimensions, or a loving call that summoned a god from the stars? They would either end her life by filling her with unwanted cosmic worm eggs, or an interstellar force would pour through a wormhole and tear her to shreds. Maybe the difference was as hair thin as when Phoebe had been stretched across time and disintegrated. Healing and harm could be a matter of perspective. Monique knew what it felt like to watch. Now she'd learn what it felt like to die. If she did nothing, didn't fight, wouldn't she become a thing the worm wouldn't want? Nothing special? Just on a sacrifice? Monique doubted that. Even if the worm was more than a non-sentient series of wormholes, he had never shown concern for the character of his bride. He had asked for any daughter from the old kings. It was on the kings to volunteer someone they loved, and only King Donna had stepped up. The worm didn't care who mothered his children so long as his kings showed supplication. Monique looked to the jagged edge of the table where once sat the seer turned broken king, a forever screaming skull and torn abdomen, frozen in black glass and stone. The worm had shown no love for mothers. This moment, this song, would be Monique's only ceremony. Beyond that, she would become the worm's fertile earth, nothing more. Ooh, a high-pitched cry snuck under the wavering song. Monique looked to the Grey Maiden, but her songs were too deep. Higher than near the viewing windows where Monique had first glimpsed this horrible room. Mimic clutched the ceiling above one window, her talons clinging to its frame, her gown draped against the wall. Her sister creatures appeared above neighboring windows. The worm's followers didn't seem to notice. They gazed only at the wall of stars. Mimic and the others stuck to the shadows and descended into the throne room. Pitiful daughters of the old kings. None were offered to the worm, but he kept them in his own way. Now they were here to see Monique off, bridesmaids to the bride of the worm. She sat up from the chair. No, he hadn't kept them. They had leaked through old time by accident, his wrath giving a window from their dead time to this one. Even the worm could make a mistake. If the daughters had survived, then Monique could too. She had never meant to do more with her life than keep living, and she wasn't going to drop it without a fight. Donna was at least right on that count. The Grey Maiden turned her head from side to side. Ooh. King Donna was too high on victory to notice. Her choir carried on. Stop singing, Monique hissed. She grabbed the box of Pop-Tarts off the table and flung it at the balcony. It struck the railing and burst, raining shiny packages all over the floor. Stop it! That caught Donna's eye. Monique grabbed an old book and threw it as hard as she could. It tumbled over the balcony railing and landed in front of Israel. If he wavered, she couldn't hear it in the song. She grabbed bowls, cups, spoons, one of the silver masks, still coughing up bits of dry skull, and chucked them, pelting balcony and singer alike. Mimic reached the floor but clung to the edges of the room. Her sister creatures kept climbing up the walls. Sorry, water break. Monique's legs wobbled again, but she grasped the table this time and stood. She could manage this. Mimic reached ahead as if balancing herself too. I'm not alone, Monique whispered. Soft wind tugged at the hem of her gown and drew her eyes back to the wall of stars. A draft seemed to flow into the dark patches at its edges. There were maybe a dozen holes still glowing with fungal light. The rest had gone dark. She grabbed the back of the bridal chair and dragged it alongside the table. Mimic pretended to do the same on hunched birdie legs. It was a hard, hobbling journey, but Monique reached the jagged end of the table. She sat the chair where the broken king's throne must have once sat and dropped into it. Mimic didn't squat beside her, her head cocked. There's room for both of us, Monique scooted to one side of the chair. Don't leave me alone. But Mimic wouldn't sit. Something wasn't right. Taking the place of the broken king wouldn't help. It would only give the worm another victim. Donna leaned over the balcony and peered into the darkness. Who's down there with you? She asked. She glanced at the gray maiden and then into the throne room again. They can't help you. They aren't even human. Their time is over and ours has come. Not human. That was fine. Humans hadn't done much good for Monique so far. Maybe in Pangea they thought their time had come, she said. Look at what the worm has done to see what he's going to do. He gave them kingdoms. How did he do that, Dee? What exactly did he give them? A constitution to live by? Sunless palace blueprints? They had their own culture and language before they ever found him. He gave nothing. They built kingdoms themselves to worship him, and he crushed them. From the far side of the room, Monique counted maybe 8 stars left on the wall. Darkness seeped across where their fellow fungal holes once glowed. An amorphous shape wavered in the spaces between. Donna patted the balcony railing and crooned another awkward note. More feeling. Put your hearts into it. Her choir obeyed. Monique stood on shaky legs. 2 of Mimic's sister creatures reached the floor and began to skulk the room's perimeter. Yet they kept their distance from the shrinking wall of stars and the worm's brass throne. 7 stars left on the wall. Its dark edges took on a faint light, the wisps of a faraway nebula. The empty place was reaching for it, and for Monique. She needed to get out. The balcony was full of people. Someone had to be willing to help her. Everyone was convinced Adana would abandon her. Even Donna herself believed so, but they could be wrong. Monique needed them to be wrong. She shoved the bridal chair up against the table and tried to lift it. Her arms could handle it, but her wounded foot groaned beneath the strain. The chair's back struck hard against the table's edge. If she broke it, she'd be throwing away her only boost. Mimic helped lift the other side. She seemed in the mood to imitate again. Monique wondered if she had been this way in old time, always parroting one of her sister creatures or whichever old king was her parent. Ooh, was all she would say. Monique's foot shrieked bloody murder, but she and Mimic heaved the chair onto the table. Monique climbed after it, Mimic at her side, and they dragged it down the stone surface so it rested beneath the center of the balcony's lip. Donna stared down, her expression an emotionless void. Blood had trickled and stained her cheeks, and fresh drops spat down Monique's face. She let them dribble as she climbed onto the bridal chair's seat. Soft wickers sagged underfoot, but there wasn't time to be careful. Only 4 fungal stars remained on the wall, its edges giving way to the distant twinkle of the real thing. Mimic hunkered at one corner of the table. Her sister creatures seeped in and out of shadow. Monique clambered onto the back of the chair, its narrow rim digging into her arches, and leaned against the bottom of the balcony. Her foot's wound popped open, spilling a fresh red glob down the chair's legs. She couldn't keep stable for long. She reached one hand upward. "Dee, help me," she said, wincing in pain. Donna was a statue. "Stronger." Her singers bellowed. The song became a raging river. Every note tore at Monique's gown, threatening to spill her back onto the table. She groped at the balcony, desperate for a perch to haul herself up. One fingernail pressed hard and snapped off the nail bed, exposing raw flesh to the cool air. Her scream was tiny against the song. Choral voices drowned her out. "Someone, please!" She looked into every eye. They didn't see her, same as they hadn't seen Phoebe or anyone else they'd sang to pieces. Each either wanted the world that Donna promised or was afraid they'd lose the one they had should the worm find them wanting. Maybe both. Monique's life was a small price to pay. She kicked off the bridal seat back and sent it clattering to the floor. There was nothing below now to catch her. One hand grasped the railing, but it was slipping. The other slapped at stone, desperate for a perch. "Donna, you loved me," she screeched, reaching for a hand. But there was no hand to hold. Donna's fingers splayed against the railing. "The worm is grander than love," she said. The choir thundered around her. "This is where you belong, mon amour." Monique's muscles tugged around her heart. She searched for Donna, found her, traveled down here to save her. She didn't deserve this. Donna didn't deserve her. Monique yanked hard, tearing at her shoulder, and hauled herself up. Her free hand clawed at Donna's face. Overlong nails ripped into skin. Monique was sure it hurt, but still less than Donna's betrayal. She could never bring Donna so low. Ooh, the gray maiden swatted one vicious arm along the balcony and knocked Monique aside. "Don't," Donna shouted, but she was too late. Monique twisted, half-cocked through the air. The throne room spun. Her lower back crashed against a hard, narrow surface with a sickening snap, and she crumpled between the arms of an open seat. The world blurred, blackened, brightened. She couldn't pass out. There wasn't time for sleep anymore, and the song was no longer an eerie lullaby. She tried to stand, but her lower body wouldn't unbend. The pain in her foot was gone, replaced by a strange static. A harsh ache shot through her shoulders and down one arm. Donna was speaking. "What do you think you're doing? Get up!" Monique could move her left arm, having fallen on her right side. Donna's blood coated her nails. Her right arm stuck out from beneath her. It twisted wrong at the elbow, and jagged bone now protruded from her forearm. She couldn't move from the icy brass armrest beside it. Where was she? "Get up!" Donna shouted. Monique glanced at the table. Her bridal seat had fallen on its side, one leg having snapped off. Mimic lingered beside it. Beside her, the table stretched to a jagged end, opposite to where Monique lay. This was the head of the table. She had fallen into the worm's throne. The empty place. It wanted her out. She wasn't meant to enter as a solid body. Only once the song had torn her apart and fed her to it atom by atom, stretched between tortured after images. She dug at the throne's edge with her good hand, but every movement sent ravenous teeth through her nerves. Static filled her spine. She'd have cold fingers on her at any moment, clawing through her thoughts, always present, always needy. She needed to get out. Yet, she remained. Impossible. The empty place had always dissuaded her. This had to be a mistake. Mimic approached the table's head and lay on her side, one arm jutting out, acting as Monique's mirror. One mistake faced another. Even the worm could make a mistake. Donna's breath hissed through her teeth. She pointed to the throne room and glared at the gray maiden. "Do something! Get her out of there!" The Grey Maiden glanced over the balcony and then waded through the choir and out the creaking iron doors. Heavy footsteps pounded through unseen corridors. Mimic's sister creatures gathered together, 3 climbing onto the table's head, 2 hunkering beneath its underside. Their eyes shined within their shrouds. Genuine starlight overwhelmed the wall behind the throne. Mimic reached from the table. She couldn't penetrate the empty place by force of will, but she seemed to want Monique's hand. Monique tried to reach, but couldn't. There were no cold fingers at her back, only through her legs. Her spine was broken. Mimic nestled her head against the table, her gown draping over its edges. "It's okay," she seemed to say. Or maybe that was just what Monique wanted to believe. Donna looked wild now as she leaned over her balcony. Her hair unkempt, her eyes alight with angry fire. "Stop singing," she shouted. "Stop the summoning. It's no longer pure." A few members of the choir stuttered and broke their notes, but the rest couldn't stop all at once. Their songs seemed to have overtaken him, and their choir maids had to nudge them or press hands over their blood-stained mouths to snuff it out. Even when they'd all stopped, the song's echo rang through the throne room, a genie unwilling to be bottled once more. The echo sang from Mimic's throat. She was beyond asking questions, and now belted out one arm of the worm's universe-piercing melody. Her sister creatures took up the rest, their throats better suited than the choir's to bass arias and musical power. Nothing changed in the notes' eerie dissonance, and yet when they sang, the song became the most beautiful sound Monique had ever heard. Melody and rhythm flowed inside her, filling her even within the empty place, the way a song should. She lifted her head and glanced through the spires of the worm's throne at the wall of stars. Distant suns roamed an unknown sky, lost in the wilderness of cold cosmic decay. Talons scraped at stone as the Grey Maiden squeezed through the throne room doorway where Donna had disappeared once dismissed. "Ooh," she threatened at the table's cluster and then turned to Monique. "Ooh," her long fingers reached for the throne. Monique turned again to Mimic and her sister creature. They were bridemaids at the worm's wedding, but never the bride. Monique wouldn't be the bride either. The Grey Maiden's talons slid from the empty air, repelled by an unrelenting wall. Monique had seen it 100 times in Freedom Tunnel, felt it beside her in the night, crossed it in Empire Music Hall in this room. The Grey Maiden reached again, shoulders hunched up, clearly straining, but no force of will could breach the empty place. Only a mistake. It had been a vacuous space awaiting its glorious monster. A pure and empty place fit for a god, but it wasn't pure or empty anymore. A Monique-shaped drop of blood, now corrupted, its perfect ocean of stars. No wonder wretched purity. No longer wretched purity. It grew beautifully tainted by mortal body and soul. The last fungal star vanished from the wall. There was no stone behind it, only freezing blackness that punched into the throne room. It had expected purity. Instead, it flowed through the throne around Monique into what should have been an empty place, but now was her place. She was flesh and bone becoming the stars. She was a constellation that had pretended it was flesh and bone. Already, she couldn't tell which came first. Maybe the difference was a matter of perspective. Starlight hadn't meant to journey here, but since when did their intent matter? No one ever asked the stars what they wanted. Her gaze swept across the vastness of infinity and then focused on the Grey Maiden, Mimic, and her sister creatures. The throne room folded around them. The Grey Maiden stood dwarfed beneath collapsing shadows, a surviving fragment in an unfair universe. How had she ever seemed so tall? Her final "ooh" broadened into a foghorn's scream as cloak and rot and talons sank into dark stone. The sister creature sank behind her, less resistant, finding familiar black glass drinking their hearts and souls. Mimic clasped her hands beneath her head and waited. They were fading musical notes, but their songs stuck in Monique's head. Table, seats, silver masks, and the worm's brass throne crushed against each other until they became a mashed conglomerate between flattening walls. Stone collapsed across patches of glowing fungi. Dust spilled down Monique's growing shape. She imagined sifting fingers through the debris and learning everything the Sunless Palace had ever seen. But there was no need. This was the end. The balcony sank beneath her. How had it ever looked so high up? Now Monique reached across its stone railing with ease, where she poured her enormity across the nearest nameless singer. Body and soul snapped beneath her. One death wasn't nearly enough. She unfurled across Israel in that same moment, and then another boy, and then the rest of the choir. She reached above them for Bouchard and his fellow onlookers who had praised genocide and cheered death. Now their faces shriveled into leather and their skulls caved into red-white shrapnel. Their bodies flattened and fused to the palace floor until Monique could no longer tell the difference between blood and stone. King Dana, the last alive, collapsed on hands and knees. "I swear fealty, great worm. I'm your—" Her throat snatched her voice. Tears and blood streamed down her face. She sank not deeper into the room, but into herself. She was too pitiful to crush. Monique turned from her and burrowed up the palace. Had hours passed since she first came to Empire Music Hall, or days? She couldn't tell anymore. Time was now someone else's problem. The Sunless Palace buckled beneath her, its flower wilting. Someone might escape by crawling through its passages to reach the elevator, but none would worship here again. Graves would be respected. Their ghosts left to mourn their lives. She spilled across the subterranean lake and into the chamber of old time. Shapeless starlight reflected in its black glass. If she still had a face, she didn't want to see it. She folded the chamber against her, close to her heart. Karen lay dead within. Monique took her too. The king of the broken throne, with her pilfered womb, sank into stone, fading from a world that was never hers. There, the last precious treasure. Monique climbed from the underground. A song that was stuck in her head pierced time itself and opened past, present, and future to her. There were other directions, but she wasn't ready to travel them yet. A death called to her. She sang across years. 10, 20, 50, she couldn't tell for certain. They were such small numbers against infinity. She knew only the determined moment she meant to see. Decades beyond the Sunless Palace's collapse, Donna slept in a white hospital bed at the center of a gleaming room. Wrinkles and pockmarks coated her skin. Dotted scars traced her forehead, and 3 parallel scars cast stripes down one cheek, the remains of an old wound that her decaying mind could no longer remember. Shining machines clicked and beeped to either side of her bed. One monitor traced her frail heartbeat. Plastic tubes fed painkillers into her bloodstream and oxygen into her wheezing lungs. A much younger woman sat at her bedside. Monique didn't know her, but she had been crying. That was fine. She would not be crying much longer. Beyond the hospital room's windows, the world burned. Wastelands stretched where forests used to grow, and brackish water flooded once well-traveled neighborhoods. Donna seemed one of the last who would reach old age. Her heartbeat stuttered, slowed, stopped. This world held no further purpose. Monique sank deeper through time. Millennia crumbled into soil around her. She looked ahead to a dying sun, billions of years old, its explosive final fate erasing all traces of Earth and its fellow planets. She remembered Pangea, across shadow, eons of would-be and never was. She swam black oceans and forgotten constellations until she found frailty between the stars. It was easier than most anyone would believe, but she thought it made sense. Most of the space was an empty place. Most of space was an empty place. The song that was still caught in her head at last slid out in full force. She began to sing. Notes long unknown to the universe now roared across creation. No mortal creature understood this melody. It burrowed worm-like between dimensions, imperceptible to mankind, thinning time and space to a hair, to nothing. The difference between human souls and the black emptiness of space, then unknowable even to her. The song's bridge became physical, the kind she could cross, and she crossed it, first back 175 million years to unmake a mistake, and then ahead to prevent another. Fields and forests swept beneath her. Beautiful black cities formed curving mountains in every direction, their ornate spires stretching skyward. They were lived-in flowers, and the world grew in a lush violet around them. At the center of the supercontinent stood a palace that honored starlight, and inside, the old kings gathered around a table of black glass. The pregnant seer sat at one end. At the head, an empty brass throne awaited a god. Monique poured into its vacuous space, nothing present to corrupt her, and her absolute will flooded the table. Never mind what she'd been about to demand. She needed no bride. She needed no daughters. The grateful seer placed a hand over womb. A nearly formed daughter might have come to be called a tall lady, Gray Hill, Gray Maiden, names given whether she wanted them or not. Now, her mother might name her in her own singing tongue. Someday, she might name herself if she pleased. One of the old king's daughters mimicked the seer's gesture, hand over middle, and the others crooned amusement. They were all dismissed. Forever. Let the table crack to pieces as if it never existed. Let the palace stand derelict until its old purpose was forgotten and its people found a new one. There would be no more altars to starlight, no kingdoms to honor it. The seer's people might resist such a transition after long years of being used to cosmic worship, and the work to change that outlook would be hard and soul-breaking, but the world could do better than a carver. They would never know their ruin. The sundering of Pangea was Monique's secret to keep. She sang a song of healing to hush screams from beyond the stars, and those, too, were her secret. Every moment of human existence became nothing worse than a bad dream, from which the world was finally awake. On the far side of the bridge, over where she had crossed infinities, reality cracked, and time seeped through its fissures. Years crushed against each other as if jammed into a too small container, every era united in death. Ancient magma flooded digital megacities. Dinosaurs migrated across Utah salt flats alongside woolly mammoths, and a Jersey radio station played all the hits for Paleozoic fish as they first found land inviting, a swan song for time itself. This earth hardly knew its own face, its beginning and end slamming against each other and then becoming one. In a single, unified moment, Donna's dream came true. There was a world without hate. And then there was no Donna, never had been, never would be. White, blinding light overtook the skies, a memory of the Big Bang weaving into a premonition of the sun's supernova. One death undone, a birth unmade to pay for it. The cosmos shattered into glass shards, and then slivers, and then fading stardust, and a cold, empty nothing surrounded by the vicious wound of a murdered universe. A wormhole for the worm.